Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Eric Snodgrass joining us to talk weather this week. Well, Eric, later in the show, we're going to take a deep dive into this tight wrap tassel that's causing some pollination issues across the country. But, I've heard some critics lately saying, how can weather be playing a factor into these pollination problems when we've had near ideal weather conditions this year? Eric, do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, near ideal when it comes to precip. We have a very limited area that's in drought. We saw drought reduce dramatically as we got from spring into summer, but the transition from spring to summer is what we have to talk about. So think back about it. It was cool and wet for a lot of May and the beginning of June. And then starting in mid to late June, right around the solstice, in fact, we put not just heat on the crop, but a lot of heat on the crop. And one of the big factors there was with very, very warm overnight lows. So the rate at which the biomass came into this crop was very, very fast. And so when you're putting on, leaves and then eventually an ear very quickly in that corn crop, we've seen a couple of things like rapid growth syndrome. You get these little waves in the leaves of the corn plant. And then we've seen some tassel wrap, which is basically where that top leaf has just continued to kind of grab around where the tassel is. Now, you may not be able to go through and see a lot of it now because this was a problem we saw over the last few weeks, but there's no denying that starting in the Eastern Corn Belt since the start of this summer, the solstice, okay, we've had record overnight low temperatures on the whole when you average them. So that overnight low problem can really start to show up later when we harvest a crop and realize that we may have had a little bit of trouble getting through pollination.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this in much more detail coming up later in the show. But, I'm hearing from farmers in like North Dakota saying, actually, we need this heat. Our beans don't look really good right now. We need this heat. But is there a cool down coming for the rest of the country, Eric?
Yeah, there is. Thankfully. I mean, it's stifling today and it's been very, very hot as of late, but we need to get through the rest of this weekend and then get through into early next week. And we start to see a pattern change happening. So we're going to finish July and start August with better chances of cooling the conditions back down, which honestly is going to be ideal for the crop to move forward. And it's going to continue to look really good because of this. I mean, the heat wave that just came through is short, which means by all objective measures that we use this time of year, like satellite-based plant health, views, the NDVI values are going to continue to be very, very high. And the heat wave that just came through, it was short by some standards. So, yep, we got cool down coming. Thank goodness, because I'm already tired of this here.
Eric, what about the rain? I mean, I just think about earlier this week here in Kansas City and hearing some other farmers too. We
Yeah.
had some unexpected showers and they just weren't light showers. We had flooding rains that really weren't even in the forecast. What is driving that excessive moisture in some of these areas?
Yeah, we've had nonstop access to Gulf moisture. So there's just been nothing turning that off. And as a result, we've been able to just generate huge storms on plenty of moisture. And you got to remember, this is the time of year too, where we hear all about the corn sweat, right? That shows up a lot in some of the news media. And we just can't forget that each acre of corn can evaporate an additional 4,000 gallons of water into the atmosphere. Now, that's not a lot, believe it or not. 4,000 gallons, if you precipitate it back out onto that acre, it's only about 0.15 inches deep. But the reality is we expect to see more ridge riding storms. I mean, even just recently, yeah, you said Kansas City, Chicago was hit. Iowa was just hit. Sioux Falls flooding earlier. I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of water that's come out of the atmosphere. And in the upcoming forecast, we continue to see storms running the periphery of a ridge that's going to probably live farther into the southern plains of the United States. But until you shut off the Gulf, we're going to have moisture coming through the country.
Yeah, so the next 2 weeks, is this a theme that you are watching? Can some of this excessive moisture coming out of the Gulf, do you think that does continue?
I do. I think it continues. And if you ask me, the smartest forecast going longer term is probably using persistence. In other words, what have we just seen? Keep it going until there's some big, overwhelming push to shove the atmosphere in a different direction.
All right, Eric. So we've been talking about moisture. I know last winter we started talking to you about drought, and that didn't really materialize, thank goodness, in the heart of the Midwest this year.
Yeah.
But as you look to fall, are drier conditions, do you think, going to enter the picture?
Well, what have we learned from the last two La Nina falls? They've gotten really dry. And so we have another one that's coming on. The Climate Prediction Center has now increased the probability of a fall La Nina to be above all the other categories. And if that's the case, and we get a more Nina-like pattern developing in October and November, we tend to have a pretty good harvest window that opens up. We tend to be drier throughout much of the Midwest. And then it tends to give us a legit chance at a decent winter. Last winter was very, very cold through the middle of it. And that was partly spurred on by La Nina. So the question will become, as we start to see this, is how does it affect growing areas around the rest of the world too, because about the time we're harvesting a crop, South America's planting a crop. And don't forget, La Nina events tend to get the Brazilian monsoon going early, which means they have better opportunity to plant in October and early November versus mid to late November. And that is a factor that you're going to be talking a lot about it as time goes on, and I will as well.
Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien, thanks so much for joining us this weekend. All right, we mentioned the pollination problems across the Midwest, but the markets really don't seem to be paying attention to it, even though we've confirmed it in several states. So we're going to talk about that and why the markets aren't watching it next in our marketing roundtables.